Well, welcome back to the third and final segment of Chapter 17, Third-Party Rights. Just by way of quick review, once again, in order to have a valid contract that's going to be effective, you need to have four elements: an agreement, consideration, capacity, and legality. An agreement: was there offer and acceptance? Consideration: is there bargained for exchange flowing between the parties? Capacity: was the person 18 or over, or were they not drunk, or were they sane? And legality: is it a legal contract and not against public policy? If you have all four of those elements, chances are you have a valid contract on your hands, unless you have some exceptions that we talked about, I believe, in Chapter 15 and Chapter 16, which I will leave for you to review in the videos. Now, we're talking about third-party rights. In the previous video segment, we talked about assignment of rights in the first segment. In the second segment, we talked about delegation of duties. I can underscore to you the importance of taking a look at those prior charts, those diagrams that are provided to you. The one with assignment of rights is on page 310 of the text. The one for delegation of duties, it's on page 314 of the text. It shows you how both assignment of rights work and delegation of duties work, and shows you who the parties are. Very important for the purpose of understanding the concepts and for understanding questions on a test. Also, there's a great summary, a great overview of assignment of rights and delegations of duties on page 315 of the text. I refer that to you as well as a very helpful study tool. And now we move on to the third type of third-party rights that are involved in contracts, and those involve third-party beneficiaries. Let me flip to that slide. Bam. So, third-party beneficiaries. Let's start with a real concrete example. A third-party beneficiary is a contract in which the two main parties enter into, and the whole purpose of the contract, more often than not, is to benefit an intended third party. Okay, what's an example? Well, I, as a parent, as a father of two children, and as a husband of a loving wife, I have taken out a life insurance contract on myself. And most likely, if any of you were to check with your parents, you would find out that they have a life insurance contract as well. So that if, God forbid, something happens to me and I pass away, there will be sufficient funds that will be provided by the life insurance company to take care of the financial needs of my surviving wife, my surviving spouse, and hopefully meet the needs of my two children, whatever needs they may have, or possibly my grandchildren. Now, for a long time, I didn't tell my kids about my life insurance policy. But at one point I did tell them, which was a major fail on my part, because I basically told my two loving children that I was worth more dead to them than alive. So, I kind of, every once in a while it sends a chill down my spine that, gee, I hope they don't act on that and do some type of terrible act that would cause them to reap the benefits of that life insurance contract. Hopefully that will not be the case. But in that life insurance policy, my two children and my wife are the third-party beneficiaries of that contract. And so when you have these situations, you got to ask yourself, well, who are the various parties? Well, the first question is who is the promisor? Who made the promise to benefit the third party? Well, in our situation, that would be the life insurance company, right? They're the ones that made the promise to pay off the benefits should something happen to me. Now, in traditional third-party beneficiary analysis by the courts, they used to categorize that in two categories. They were viewed as either a creditor beneficiary or a donee beneficiary. A creditor beneficiary would be a situation in which you and I enter into a contract. You perform the services for me, and then you say, hey, instead of paying me, please pay my friend Bob, because I owe Bob the exact amount of money that you're going to pay me. And in that situation, Bob is the third party creditor beneficiary. The other types of traditional beneficiaries were, in the old days, traditional view was a donee beneficiary. And that was the situation that I just described for you. A donee beneficiary is the person who benefits in a life insurance contract. This is very important from the traditional view. You need to remember this. Write this down. This may come up later, if you know what I'm saying. When a contract is made well, let's see here. Here we go. In a situation involving a third-party beneficiary, that's a donee beneficiary, like my children in the life insurance contract, the donee beneficiary can sue the promisor, the life insurance company, directly to enforce the promise or for a breach of contract. A donee, listen carefully, a donee beneficiary can sue the promisor to enforce the promise in the case of a breach of a contract. Okay, make a note of that. That may come up later for you, if you know what I'm saying. It's good to know. So in the old days, it was donee beneficiary versus creditor beneficiary, but the courts started to get a little frustrated, saying, well, how do we know which one is which? How do we classify them? How do we do that? And they kept trying to squeeze one or the other into the appropriate category. So over time, the courts kind of changed their analysis. They said, well, why don't we take the more modern view, which is this person that we're dealing with an intended beneficiary or an unintended beneficiary? A lot easier to do it that way. So if we have an intended beneficiary, they're a person, like say in the life insurance contract, I specifically name them as the beneficiary, my two kids and my wife. They are the intended beneficiary. And you have to ask, well, when do the rights of an intended beneficiary vest? When are they entitled to their benefits? Well, there's a number of criteria that can be used. They're listed in the outline here on the PowerPoint. Their rights can vest when the third party demonstrates their express consent. Sure, I'll be the beneficiary. Or when the third party materially alters their position in reliance upon the contract. But in a situation involving a life insurance policy, their rights as a beneficiary vest when the conditions for vesting are satisfied. That is to say, when I pass away. Because prior to that time, I can always change the beneficiaries. And so their rights as a beneficiary do not truly vest in that situation until I pass away. So intended beneficiaries, they're usually named. We know who they are. And anybody else is considered an incidental beneficiary. Any beneficiary who is not deemed by the court to be an intended beneficiary is considered an incidental beneficiary. And they ordinarily do not get any benefits. They cannot sue to enforce any rights they might have because they're merely an incidental beneficiary. Text gives a good example of a case involving the fight between Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. You may have read about that fight. That's when in the middle of the fight, Mike Tyson got a little bit hungry and ate part of Evander Holyfield's ear. Ooh. That fight, because of that, was cut short, as you might imagine. I think it was in the very, very first round. And so the members in the audience sued for a refund, saying that they were beneficiaries. But the court said, very wisely, wait a minute. You guys were only incidental beneficiaries. You were not intended beneficiaries. Therefore, you can't really sue for any potential benefits as a third-party beneficiary. So then let's close it up by looking at this final thing, that when the courts try to figure out if a person's an intended beneficiary or an incidental beneficiary, they will look at whether performance is rendered directly to the third party. That's an indication that they're intentional. Whether they have the right to control the details, possibly, and lastly, whether the third party was expressly designated as a beneficiary. My kids, my wife, they're expressly named in the life insurance policy. Those are pretty good signs that those people were intended beneficiaries. Well, that pretty much wraps it up with regard to third-party rights, assignment of rights, delegation of duties, and third-party beneficiaries. As you know, the rest of this week, along with Chapter 17, in the previous part of the week, you guys were to take an exam covering chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. Hopefully you took the practice exam that was offered through HonorLock, and hopefully if you haven't, hopefully you've taken the test and you did well on it. I hope so. When we meet again, we'll be covering chapter 18 in the text, and that will be during week 12. We'll be covering chapters 18 and chapters 19, and I believe as a result of that, we may be wrapping up contracts. Until we meet again, this is Professor Bollinger wishing you good health and that you stay safe. Take care.